Today I'm going to show you what you need to know about how your outboard charges your batteries, whether they be lead acid or lithium. Now the engine's either going to have a stator or an alternator, and I'll explain how I see the difference between the two in just a minute. Here we have the flywheel of the engine, and then underneath the flywheel is where we have our stator. Now our stator then comes over to this item here, which is our rectifier regulator. And this is our stator. So our stator has these laminated coils of wire, which is basically just wire coiled around a set number of times based on the stator, how much voltage we're trying to produce and whatnot. And they're attached, they have these wires that go around, and each one of them attaches to these two right here, which then are fed down here, which connects to our rectifier regulator, which we just took off. And what happens is we need a magnet to go by each and every one of these, so as the magnet goes by it, the magnet will actually activate this, and then when the magnet passes by, it collapses that, which creates an electric sine wave basically. You'll notice that there are two wires, so we've got this black one and this white one right here. The white one goes all the way around to this other end, and the black one starts from this one. So you're basically connected from here to here. This one's on one end and this one is on the other end. And here is our flywheel. If you look at the flywheel, you can't really see anything that, you know, is going to be separate. Like you can't see that there's magnets in here, and they are all separated. So if you notice, if I go like this, that sticks. If I move it a little bit here, it breaks free. So you see how that breaks free? There's no sticking right in between here. It's going to jump back and forth between those two magnets. So as we go around, it's going to go from magnet to magnet. Letting go, stuck to the next magnet, next magnet. So we've got magnets all the way around this whole thing that have breaks in between the separate magnets. This is important to note because there are all those different magnets all the way around the flywheel, and you have all those different little coil windings on your stator. So as those magnets are going by those different coils that are in the stator, it's creating an electric field. And then when that magnet passes by it, it basically collapses that field, and then that is what creates the electric current. Or rather, it's inducing an electromagnetic current, or voltage, I guess would be the better way to say it. If this is the coil winding, as the magnet goes by it, it creates that current flowing in this direction. Now, based on the magnet being north and south, based on the magnetic poles of that magnet and which way the coil winding is wound up, it will have voltage going this way, and then as it goes by, it basically goes back the other way. So you kind of get this current that's going back and forth as these magnets spin around these coil windings based on the north-south pole of the magnet. And that's about as technical as we really want to get, which it is alternating current and not direct current, which is important to note because in our batteries store direct current, not alternating current. And alternating direct current is pretty simple. It's just a sine wave. On an alternating current electric sine wave, you have a wave that goes like this. And then on a direct current, it just goes up, up, up. So it's basically cut in half. And that is how we store electricity on the boat. That is where this piece right here, the rectifier regulator, comes into play. Because this is super important, because it is what is going to take that alternating current from the stator, which is just raw alternating current that can't go into a battery, and then it cuts it in half to make it direct current, and it is what then, after it rectifies it, will then regulate it so that way it doesn't send too much voltage to your battery. Because if you send too much voltage to your battery, then you're going to either burn out the battery, I mean, you're going to kill the battery eventually because it's getting too much voltage. If you put a, say, 18, 20 volts into a 12 volt battery, it's going to burn it up. You're going to kill the battery and shorten the life by a lot. Which is what makes this component here so important. And that is because this will regulate that voltage. You're going to have the two wires right here. Your two wires come into this, which also goes to that, and then comes back into this. So you have both of those wires coming in to the rectifier regulator, as well as a power wire and then a ground. The rectifier regulator is going to sense the power that's at the battery. So this right here is connected to your battery, and it's going to know if you've got 11 volts, if you've got 12 volts, if you've got 15 volts. This is what senses that, and based on that sense, it is going to then divert extra power to ground, which is just going to get rid of the power and not charge the battery. And that is a very important thing, because a rectifier regulator is always going to be set to let out a certain specific amount of voltage. After the power comes out of the rectifier regulator, it is then sent to the battery. Now, there are many different ways that a boat builder or boat manufacturer or person in general can set up how the charging system works from the rectifier regulator until it gets to the battery. Whether that goes through an ACR, whether that goes through a battery switch, whether that goes through an isolation circuit or through a isolator in general, there are many different ways to send that power to the battery. But it is very, very important and crucial to understand that that sensing wire from the rectifier regulator needs to be able to sense the battery that it is charging. Because if those two are separated, like if your engine is starting on one battery and your charging system is charging a different battery, the battery power that your rectifier regulator is going to see from this starting battery is not seeing the charging voltage that it is sending to this battery. And it's going to cook this battery because it's consuming power here, but it's not seeing charging voltage go to that battery. So it's just going to continue to send voltage to that battery. And there are many engines these days that do have a way of separating your starting circuit or your engine consumption, start battery, whatever you want to call it, from the charging system. So you will have two separate wires that come from the engine going to the battery. And they do that because a lot of them will also use ACRs and other isolation methods to be able to charge multiple batteries off of one stator alternator combination or engine setup, your outboard basically. Depending on the model of engine that you have, there are a lot of two-strokes that will allow that voltage to get up to like 15 volts, which is very high for a modern engine. Most modern engines regulate it somewhere between 14 and 14.7, depending on whether or not it uses a stator or an alternator. Now, when we talk about an alternator, that is where it gets different. They're basically the same thing, only in an alternator, you have the rectifier regulator built into the alternator. So it has the stator and the rectifier regulator all built into one component, and it is usually belt driven. So the magnets that are in the flywheel are now inside of the alternator in the middle of it, and those magnets spin on a spindle or a rotor, and you have those coil windings that are on our stator inside the alternator around that circular magnetic spindle. And that spindle is usually driven by a belt that is ran off the crank. Like on a traditional engine that has the stator underneath the flywheel, the stator and the rectifier regulator are separate. Whereas an alternator is going to have them both built into the same component, and it's going to be belt driven. That's probably splitting hairs because most companies call a stator an alternator or a stator. It's basically all the same thing. Just understand that there are two separate components, being the actual stator that produces the electricity and the rectifier regulator, which rectifies the AC current to DC current, which is then supplied to the battery. Where it is also important to understand is that regulation. The regulation is key, because if it is unregulated power, that stator could put out 20 volts, 24 volts. A lot of your modern alternators, like on a Mercury, if that does not see any battery voltage there at the rectifier regulator, it is going to put out as much amperage and as much power as that alternator can put out. So if you disconnect its sensing wire, which would be the red wire on our regular rectifier regulator, that alternator is no longer sensing what voltage the battery has, and it's going to tell the alternator to put out everything it's got, which could be 26, 27 volts. And if you put 27 volts of 100 amps into a battery, that's going to kill this battery. And that is how it also maintains the battery, using that regulation system from the rectifier regulator. It regulates it. On a Mercury, most of them stop at like 14.1, which is going to prolong the life of your battery. If you've got 15 and a half, 16 volts going into your battery, or if even 17, that is going to shorten the life of the battery because it is too much voltage. You're going to end up cooking the battery.